You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. In the heart of Maharashtra, two sisters, Seema Gavit and Renuka Shinde, would become some of the most infamous criminals in Indian history. But their journey into darkness didn't begin with murder. It started with desperation, neglect, and a broken childhood. From petty thefts to shocking acts of violence, their crimes would escalate, and the lives of innocent children would be forever changed. Kidnapping, ransom, and ultimately cold-blooded murder, these sisters would stop at nothing. In a case that shocked the nation, authorities were left hunting for answers, unaware of the sinister duo that lurked in the shadows. Join us as we dive into the chilling story of Seema and Renuka's rise into infamy, their capture, and the haunting legacy they left behind. Chapter 1: Early Life and Background. Seema Gavit and Renuka Shinde were born into a broken and troubled family in Sangli, Maharashtra. Seema was born in 1973, and Renuka came 3 years later, in 1976. Their mother, a woman with a history of multiple marriages, was largely absent in their lives, often leaving them to fend for themselves. Raised in poverty, the two sisters were deprived of any sense of emotional or physical security, which played a significant role in shaping their future criminal behavior. Their mother, who herself had a criminal background, had a long history of illicit activities, including theft and other petty crimes. Some sources suggest that the criminal environment in their household contributed to the sisters' early exposure to crime. At a young age, Seema and Renuka were introduced to the world of petty theft by their mother. This was not just a way to survive, it was a way of life. Their upbringing, devoid of stability, safety, or any nurturing influences, laid the groundwork for the disturbing choices they would make as they grew older. As children, Seema and Renuka lacked the support systems that could have offered them a chance at a different future. The neglect they suffered at the hands of their mother was only exacerbated by their impoverished circumstances. However, this environment would be a significant part of their criminal trajectory, providing them with the skills and lack of empathy necessary to become serial criminals in the years to come. Chapter 2: The First Crimes and Early Kidnappings. Seema and Renuka's first encounters with crime were small-scale, initially involving petty thefts and minor offenses. However, as they entered their teenage years, their criminal activities began to escalate. While they had already been exposed to theft, it wasn't until the mid-90s that they moved into more serious criminal activity, particularly kidnapping. The first kidnapping was carried out in 1990, when the sisters were still in their teens. They abducted a young girl from a crowded market in Mumbai. The victim was just a child around 5 years old. At first, the sisters simply took the girl and held her for ransom. This initial abduction was a test, a way to understand the mechanics of how kidnappings could work. But as time went on, the sisters learned to perfect their technique, becoming more methodical and bold in their approach. The sisters often targeted children from poor families who were likely to be left unattended in public spaces. Markets, railway stations, and busy streets became their hunting grounds. They would lure children away from their guardians by offering them candy, toys, or simply by pretending to be friendly, often using their own youthful appearance to gain the children's trust. Once the children were in their grasp, they would quickly whisk them away to remote locations, sometimes using trains to travel across several cities to avoid being detected. In the early stages, the sisters demanded ransom from the parents of the children they abducted, using their mother's experience in negotiation and criminal tactics to handle the ransom calls. They were cold, calculating, and relentless, ensuring that the parents were terrified enough to comply with their demands. However, not all of the kidnapped children were returned unharmed. Over time, the sisters became more reckless and their killings began. Chapter 3: The Turn to Murder. As their criminal activities progressed, kidnapping alone became insufficient to satisfy their growing need for power and control. Around 1993, the sisters escalated their crimes into something far more sinister: murder. This shift in their behavior marked a significant change in the nature of their crimes, as they began to systematically kill the children they kidnapped. The method of murder they employed was both horrific and chillingly efficient. They would often strangle or suffocate their victims, sometimes using items such as scarves, cloth, or even their bare hands to cut off the children's air supply. In some cases, the children were drugged before being killed, ensuring that they wouldn't struggle or scream. The sisters reportedly showed no remorse for their actions, and their indifference to the suffering of their victims was evident in the way they conducted their killings. The killings weren't merely the result of the sisters' desperation for money. They seemed to have become a part of the thrill they experienced from exercising control over another life. According to some reports, the sisters even enjoyed the process of planning and executing these abductions, treating it as a game. Their lack of empathy and growing sadism were key factors that allowed them to continue with their reign of terror, unperturbed by the human lives they destroyed. At this point, their modus operandi became predictable. After abducting a child, they would kill them in a secluded place. The bodies were often dumped far from the scenes of the abductions, sometimes in rural areas where the authorities would have a harder time finding them. The sisters worked together with brutal precision, with Seema typically taking the lead, while Renuka was the one who carried out the murders. Chapter 4: The authorities begin to investigate. The police began to take notice of the string of disappearances in Maharashtra, particularly in and around Mumbai, Pune, and other major cities. The case first came to attention when several children went missing in quick succession, and the authorities started to wonder whether they were dealing with a serial kidnapper or murderer. At first, there was no clear link between the disappearances, and investigators were baffled by the lack of evidence. But over time, they began to notice certain patterns. The abductions seemed to take place in similar locations, with most victims being young girls. Additionally, there was a recurring theme of the children being taken from public areas, such as railway stations, where they could be easily concealed in a crowd. The breakthrough came when a young boy, who had managed to escape after being kidnapped by the sisters, provided a detailed description of the women who had taken him. The boy's description was instrumental in helping the police develop a profile of the kidnappers. They quickly realized that they were not dealing with one criminal, but two: Seema and Renuka, the sisters who had been under the radar for years. By 1997, the investigation had enough evidence to warrant a manhunt for the sisters. They were tracked to a train station in Mumbai, where they were finally apprehended. When arrested, the sisters were reportedly calm and unemotional, almost as if they had been expecting their capture. The arrest brought a wave of relief to the public, but it also raised new questions about their motives and how such young women could commit such heinous acts. Chapter 5: The Trial of Seema, Gavit, and Renuka Shinde. The trial of Seema, Gavit, and Renuka Shinde was a media sensation, attracting national attention due to the sheer brutality of their crimes. The prosecution presented a damning case, showing that the sisters had abducted and murdered a total of 13 children, with the possibility that there were more victims. Their involvement in the deaths of these children was thoroughly documented, and there was no question of their guilt. During the trial, Seema and Renuka were unmoved by the accusations. They continued to deny their involvement in the killings, though the evidence against them was overwhelming. The sisters' defense argued that they were coerced into committing the crimes by their mother, who was portrayed as the mastermind behind their actions. However, this defense did little to sway the court, as it became clear that Seema and Renuka were not merely victims of their mother's influence, they were active participants in the crimes. The trial lasted for several years, with both sides presenting their cases. The court heard from a number of witnesses, including the surviving victims who were fortunate enough to escape before being killed. In the end, the sisters were convicted on multiple charges of kidnapping and murder. The severity of their crimes led to a sentence of death for both women. Chapter 6: The Death Penalty and Commutation. In 2001, Seema Gavit and Renuka Shinde were sentenced to death. The court found their crimes to be so brutal and their lack of remorse so striking that the death penalty seemed the only just punishment. The sentence sparked intense debate in India about the morality of the death penalty, particularly in cases involving women. Some believed that the sisters, despite their horrific acts, deserved life imprisonment rather than execution. Others felt that their actions warranted the most severe penalty possible. However, in 2004, the Supreme Court of India commuted the death sentences of both sisters to life imprisonment. The court cited their youth at the time of the crimes and the fact that they were both under the age of 30 when the murders occurred. This decision was controversial and led to further public outrage, as many felt that the sisters had escaped true justice. Despite the change in their sentences, Seema and Renuka's fate was sealed. They remained in prison for the rest of their lives, where they would reflect on the terror they had caused. For many, the case remains one of the most disturbing examples of how a combination of neglect, abuse, and a lack of empathy can lead to unspeakable acts of violence. Chapter 7: The Aftermath and Legacy. The story of Seema Gavit and Renuka Shinde left a permanent scar on the Indian public's consciousness. The sisters' crimes not only exposed the vulnerabilities of children in a rapidly urbanizing society, but also highlighted the disturbing effects of neglect and abuse on young minds. Their case became a symbol of the dangers lurking in the shadows, and their names are forever associated with one of the darkest chapters in India's criminal history. The victims' families, meanwhile, are left with the painful memory of their children's abductions and murders. Many of them will never fully recover from the loss, and the case serves as a somber reminder of the fragility of life. As for Seema and Renuka, their legacy is one of horror and tragedy. The sisters' names will always be linked to one of the most brutal series of child kidnappings and murders India has ever seen, and their story continues to be a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of a life marred by abuse and neglect. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, may your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.